10 years ago, a group of friends set out for a day of adventure, their laughter echoing across the sunlit beach as they prepped their scuba gear. The ocean stretched out before them, a shimmering promise of mystery and thrill. Among them was Marcus, a vibrant 19-year-old with a smile that could light up the darkest depths. He was the kind of person who'd give you the shirt off his back, always putting others first. Little did anyone know, that day would be the last time his mother, Diane, saw him alive. They dove into the turquoise waves, chasing the wonders of the deep. But hours passed, and the group never resurfaced. The Coast Guard searched for days, helicopters buzzing over the endless water, but there was no trace, not a single clue. Diane's heart shattered, clinging to hope that her son was out there, somewhere. What happened beneath those waves? Was it an accident, or something far more sinister? For a decade, she carried that question like a weight, until a shocking discovery turned her world upside down. Across town, years later, another story was unfolding, one that would weave into Marcus's mystery in ways no one could predict. Jamal, a quiet 17-year-old, was riding the city bus home from school. The bus was packed, every seat taken, when a pregnant woman stepped on, her face pale and tired. Without a second thought, Jamal stood, offering her his seat with a shy nod. She smiled, grateful, and slipped something into his hand, a folded note. He didn't think much of it at first, just tucked it into his pocket. But when he read it later, his hands trembled. The words scrawled on that paper weren't just a thank you, they were a clue, a thread to a truth buried for years. What did that note say? And how could a simple act of kindness pull Jamal into a mystery that had haunted Diane for a decade? The ocean keeps its secrets, and so do people. As Diane dug deeper, chasing the truth about her son's disappearance, and Jamal followed the trail of that mysterious note, their paths began to converge. Each step uncovered fragments of a story too wild to believe, tales of courage, betrayal, and a truth so shocking it would change lives forever. What really happened to Marcus and his friends that day? And what was written in that note that made Jamal question everything he thought he knew? Stick around, because the answers will leave you speechless, but we're not there yet. The truth is closer than you think, and it's darker than you can imagine. Diane sat at her kitchen table, the same one where she and Marcus used to share late-night talks over hot chocolate, his laughter filling the room like music. Now, the house felt hollow, the silence a constant reminder of the day he vanished. It was 10 years ago, but the pain was as fresh as the morning she got the call from the Coast Guard. They'd found nothing, no gear, no boat, not even a trace of the 5 friends who'd gone diving off the coast of Coral Bay. Marcus, his best friend Trey, and the others were experienced divers, not reckless kids. They knew the reefs, the currents, the risks. Diane had gone over every detail in her mind 1,000 times, the clear skies, the calm seas, the way Marcus had hugged her extra tight before leaving, promising to be back for dinner. "Love you, Ma," he'd said, his voice so full of life. So what went wrong? The official report called it a tragic accident, maybe a riptide or equipment failure, but Diane never bought it. Something about it felt off, like a puzzle with missing pieces. She'd spent years chasing leads, old dive logs, weather reports, even rumors of shady charters in the area, but every trail went cold. Until now. Last week, a package arrived at her doorstep, no return address, just a plain brown envelope with her name scrawled in shaky handwriting. Inside was a single photograph, grainy and worn, showing Marcus and his friends on the boat that day, smiling under the bright sun. But in the corner of the image, half hidden by shadows, was something Diane had never seen before, a second boat, barely visible, lurking at the edge of the frame. Her heart raced as she squinted at it, trying to make out details. Was it following them? Why hadn't anyone mentioned another vessel? The photo came with a note, unsigned, with just 2 words, "Keep looking." Diane's hands shook as she read it again and again. Who sent this? And why now, after all these years? She felt a spark of hope, but it was tangled with dread. Whatever happened to her son wasn't an accident, she was sure of it now. But digging into this mystery meant unearthing secrets someone clearly wanted buried. Meanwhile, Jamal was grappling with a mystery of his own. That note from the pregnant woman on the bus was burning a hole in his pocket. He'd read it a dozen times since that day, each time feeling a mix of confusion and curiosity. "You're kinder than most," it began, in neat, looping handwriting. "If you want to know what happened at Coral Bay, find the man with the anchor tattoo." Coral Bay? Jamal's stomach twisted. Everyone in town knew about the diving tragedy 10 years ago. It was the kind of story people whispered about, a local legend steeped in sorrow. 5 friends, gone without a trace. Jamal wasn't even 7 when it happened, but he remembered the news, the search boats, the way his mom held him a little tighter when they passed the beach. Why was this woman pointing him to that mystery? And who was the man with the anchor tattoo? Jamal didn't know where to start, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the note was no accident. The woman's face stuck with him, her tired eyes, the way she'd looked at him like she knew something he didn't. He'd tried to find her, riding the same bus route for days, but she was gone, like she'd vanished into thin air. Diane couldn't stop staring at the photograph, her fingers tracing Marcus's face. He'd been so full of dreams, wanted to be a marine biologist, save the oceans, make her proud. She'd raised him alone, working double shifts at the diner to keep them afloat. He was her world, and losing him had left a hole nothing could fill. But that second boat in the photo, it was a clue, a thread to pull. She started asking around, quietly at first. Old fishermen, dive shop owners, anyone who might remember that day. Most shook their heads, saying the same old lines about unpredictable seas. But one man, a grizzled boat mechanic named Carl, paused when she showed him the photo. His eyes flicked to the shadowy boat, and for a split second, Diane saw something like fear cross his face. "Don't know nothing about that," he muttered, turning away too fast. Diane's gut told her he was lying. She didn't push, not yet, but she made a mental note to come back. Carl knew something, and she'd find out what, even if it meant stirring up trouble. Jamal, meanwhile, was starting to feel like he was in over his head. The note mentioned Coral Bay, but it didn't say where to look or who to ask. He thought about telling his mom, but she'd worry, tell him to stay out of it. Instead, he went to the library, digging through old newspaper articles about the diving incident. Grainy headlines told the story: 5 divers lost at sea, search called off after weeks. One article mentioned a witness, a fisherman named Earl Watkins, who'd seen the group's boat that day. No mention of a second boat, though. Jamal scribbled down the fisherman's name and decided to track him down. Maybe he'd know about this anchor tattoo guy. But the deeper Jamal dug, the more uneasy he felt. Why would a stranger hand him a note like that? Was it a prank, or something bigger? He thought about Marcus's mom, Diane, who he'd seen at community events, always with that quiet strength despite her loss. What if this note could help her? Or what if it led to something dangerous? Diane's search was pulling her toward the docks, a place she'd avoided for years. The salty air and creaking boats brought back too many memories of Marcus. She started asking about the boat in the photo, showing it to anyone who'd listen. Most people shrugged, but one diver, a young woman named Lena, hesitated. "I've seen a boat like that," she said, her voice low. "Old, beat up, but fast. Used to see it around the bay years ago, always at odd hours." Lena didn't know who owned it, but she mentioned a bar where shady types hung out, a place called the Rusty Anchor. Diane's pulse quickened. Anchor. Was this a coincidence, or was she getting closer? She thanked Lena and headed home, her mind racing. That night, she couldn't sleep, the photo and note sitting on her nightstand like a challenge. Someone out there knew what happened to her son. And she was going to find them, no matter what it took. Jamal, too, was restless. He'd found Earl Watkins's address, an old trailer near the edge of town. He wasn't sure what he'd say, or if Earl would even talk to him. But as he lay in bed, the note's words echoed in his mind: "Find the man with the anchor tattoo." Whoever he was, he held answers, maybe about Coral Bay, maybe about Marcus. Jamal's act of kindness on that bus had pulled him into something bigger than he'd ever imagined, and there was no turning back. As he drifted off, he wondered if Diane was out there, chasing the same truth. Little did he know, their paths were about to collide, and the secrets they'd uncover would shake them both to their core. Diane's boots crunched on the gravel outside the Rusty Anchor, the bar's neon sign flickering in the dusk like a warning. The air was thick with the smell of salt and stale beer, and her heart pounded as she pushed open the heavy door. Inside, the place was dim, filled with low murmurs and the clink of glasses. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but Lena's words about the mysterious boat and the name Anchor had lodged in her mind like a splinter. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on a group of weathered men in the corner, their faces lined with years of sun and secrets. One of them had a tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve, an anchor, crude and faded. Diane's breath caught, but she forced herself to stay calm. She ordered a soda, keeping her ears open. The men were talking about fishing quotas, but their voices dropped when she got too close. She caught snippets, something about a bad job and Coral Bay. Her pulse quickened. Was this about Marcus? She wanted to march over and demand answers, but something told her to play it smart. Whoever these people were, they didn't trust outsiders, and she was definitely that. As she sipped her drink, she felt eyes on her, like someone knew why she was there. Across town, Jamal was standing outside Earl Watkins's trailer, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years, rusted siding, overgrown weeds, a broken lawn chair tipped over in the dirt. He'd almost turned back twice, but that note was like a hook in his chest, pulling him forward. He knocked, the sound echoing in the quiet evening. No answer. He knocked again, louder, and finally heard shuffling inside. The door creaked open, revealing an old man with a scruffy beard and tired eyes. "What you want, kid?" Earl's voice was gruff, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his gaze. Jamal hesitated, then pulled out the note, holding it up. "I'm looking for someone with an anchor tattoo. It's about Coral Bay, 10 years ago." Earl's face changed, like a curtain dropping. He stepped back, shaking his head. "Don't know nothing about that. You're barking up the wrong tree." But Jamal saw his hands tremble, just for a second. "Please," Jamal pressed, his voice soft but firm. "I just need to know what happened." Earl stared at him, then slammed the door shut. Jamal stood there, heart racing, knowing he'd hit a nerve. He wasn't giving up, but he also wasn't stupid. Earl was scared, and that meant trouble. Back at the rusty Anchor, Diane was piecing together a plan. She'd overheard enough to know the man with the anchor tattoo was called Vince, a local who'd been around the docks forever. He wasn't just a fisherman, people talked about him like he was someone you didn't cross. Diane's mind raced with questions. Had Vince been on that second boat in the photo? Did he know what happened to Marcus and his friends? She couldn't confront him here, not with his crew watching her every move. Instead, she slipped out, her mind buzzing with a new lead. She remembered Marcus's old dive log, tucked away in a box at home. He'd always been meticulous, jotting down every detail, tides, depths, even the boats they passed. Maybe there was something in there, a clue about Vince or that shadowy vessel. As she drove home, the weight of the past 10 years pressed down on her. She'd always told Marcus to be careful, to trust his gut. Now, her gut was screaming that she was close to the truth, but it felt like walking a tightrope over a dark abyss. Jamal, meanwhile, wasn't ready to let Earl off the hook. He circled the trailer, noticing a shed out back with a padlock that looked newer than anything else around. Something about it felt off, like Earl was hiding more than just memories. Jamal knew he couldn't break in, not without proof or a plan, but he snapped a photo of the shed with his phone. Maybe he could find someone who knew Earl, someone who'd talk. At school the next day, he asked his history teacher, Ms. Carter, who'd lived in town her whole life. She frowned when he mentioned Earl. He used to be a good guy, but after that diving thing, he changed. Kept to himself, got jumpy. Folks said he saw something that day, but he swore he didn't. Ms. Carter's words sent a chill through Jamal. If Earl was a witness, why was he so scared? And how did the pregnant woman know to point Jamal toward this mystery? He thought about tracking her down again, but the bus route was a dead end. Still, that note felt like a key, and he wasn't letting it go. Diane spent the night poring over Marcus's dive log, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. Page after page of his neat handwriting brought him back to her, his excitement, his love for the ocean. Then she found it, a note from the day he disappeared. Saw a weird boat today, old but fast, kept its distance. Trey thought it was sketchy. Her heart stopped. Trey had been Marcus's best friend, always the cautious one. If he thought something was wrong, it probably was. The log didn't mention an anchor tattoo or Vince, but it was enough to keep Diane pushing forward. She decided to track down Lena again, the diver who'd mentioned the bar. Maybe she knew more about Vince or his boat. But as Diane closed the log, a new fear crept in. If Vince was involved, and if he'd gone to lengths to stay hidden, what would he do to keep his secret safe? She thought of Marcus, his bright smile, and steeled herself. No one was going to stop her from finding the truth. Jamal was starting to feel the weight of his own search. He'd gone back to the library, digging deeper into old articles about Coral Bay. One mentioned a local dive shop that had closed a year after the incident, run by a guy named Vince Harlow. The name hit like a lightning bolt. Could this be the Vince from the bar? The article didn't say much, just that the shop shut down amid financial trouble. But Jamal's instincts told him there was more to it. He thought about telling Diane, Marcus's mom, what he'd found, but he didn't know her personally, and showing up with a cryptic note and a hunch felt risky. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were tied. The note, the tattoo, Coral Bay, it was all connected, and Jamal was caught in the middle of something bigger than he'd ever imagined. As he walked home, he glanced over his shoulder, half expecting someone to be following him. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming, and he wasn't sure he was ready for it. Diane and Jamal were chasing the same truth, but neither knew how close they were to crossing paths or how dangerous that moment would be. Vince, the man with the anchor tattoo, wasn't just a ghost from the past, he was a shadow moving through the present, watching, waiting. And as Diane and Jamal dug deeper, they were stirring up secrets that someone, maybe Vince, maybe someone worse, would do anything to keep buried. The ocean had swallowed Marcus and his friends, but it hadn't erased the truth. It was out there, waiting, and it was about to pull everyone under. Diane's hands trembled as she stood outside Lena's small apartment, the dive log tucked under her arm like a lifeline. It was late, the kind of quiet that made every sound, a creaking board, a distant wave, feel like a warning. Lena had agreed to meet, but only after Diane insisted, her voice sharp with desperation. "I need to know about Vince," Diane had said over the phone, and Lena's pause told her everything. The young diver was scared. When Lena opened the door, her face was pale, her eyes darting to the street behind Diane. "You shouldn't be here," Lena whispered, pulling her inside. The apartment smelled of coffee and sea salt, and a map of Coral Bay was pinned to the wall, marked with red circles. Lena admitted she'd seen Vince's boat more than once back then, always at odd times, always far from the usual dive spots. "He wasn't just fishing," she said, her voice low. "I heard him once, arguing with someone on the docks about a job that went wrong. It was the day before Marcus and his friends disappeared." Diane's heart thudded. She showed Lena the dive log, pointing to Marcus's note about the sketchy boat. Lena's eyes widened. "That's Vince's rig. I'd bet my life on it." But when Diane asked who Vince worked with, Lena clammed up, glancing at the door. "You're digging into something dangerous," she warned. "People like Vince don't just let things go." Diane left with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear, Vince knew what happened to her son, and she was going to confront him, no matter the cost. Jamal, meanwhile, was taking a risk of his own. He'd gone back to Earl's trailer, this time at dusk, when the old man was less likely to see him coming. The shed out back had been nagging at him, that shiny new padlock glinting like a secret. He wasn't a thief, but the note's words, "Find the man with the anchor tattoo," felt like a mission he couldn't ignore. He'd brought a pair of bolt cutters from his cousin's garage, his hands sweaty as he crept through the weeds. Every rustle made him jump, but he kept going, driven by the thought of Marcus's mom, Diane, still grieving after all these years. What if he could help her? The lock snapped with a loud crack, and Jamal froze, expecting Earl to come storming out. Nothing. He eased the shed door open, his phone's flashlight casting shaky beams across dusty crates and fishing gear. Then he saw it, a box marked Coral Bay, 2015. His heart raced as he pried it open, finding a logbook, some old photos, and a crumpled map with a spot circled in red, labeled Drop Point. One photo showed a boat old, beat up, just like the one in Diane's picture. And there, in the corner, was a man with an anchor tattoo. Vince. Jamal's mouth went dry. He stuffed the map and a photo in his pocket, but as he turned to leave, headlights swept across the yard. Earl was back. Diane couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched as she drove to the docks the next morning. She'd made up her mind, she was going to find Vince. The rusty anchor was quiet in the daylight, but she knew he'd be there, probably nursing a coffee with his crew. Her plan was simple: show him the dive log, mention the boat, and watch his reaction. She wasn't stupid, she'd told her sister where she was going, just in case. But as she parked near the bar, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll end up like him." Her blood ran cold. Like him. Marcus. She gripped the steering wheel, torn between fear and fury. Who sent this? Vince. Someone else. She thought of the photo, the second boat, the note that had started this all. She wasn't backing down now, not when she was this close. Stepping out of the car, she spotted Vince across the lot, leaning against his truck, his anchor tattoo stark against his weathered arm. He was watching her, his eyes hard and unreadable. Diane took a deep breath, clutching the dive log like a shield, and started toward him. Every step felt like walking into a storm. Jamal was running now, his sneakers pounding the dirt as he bolted from Earl's trailer. The headlights had been close, too close, and he'd heard Earl's voice shouting something about trespassers. He didn't stop to look back, the map and photo crinkling in his pocket. He needed to get home, figure out what this drop point meant, and maybe find Diane. He'd heard she was asking around town, chasing the same mystery. If he could get this to her, it might change everything. But as he cut through an alley, a car pulled up, blocking his path. The window rolled down, and a man leaned out, his face shadowed. "You got something that don't belong to you, kid," he said, his voice low and menacing. Jamal's heart stopped. He didn't recognize the man, but the anchor tattoo on his wrist was unmistakable. Vince. How had he found him? Jamal backed away, his mind racing. The note, the map, the photo, they were all connected, and now he was in deeper than he'd ever meant to go. He turned to run, but the car's engine revved, and footsteps hit the pavement behind him. Diane was only a few feet from Vince when her phone buzzed again. Another text, this time a photo, Jamal, wide-eyed, standing in an alley. Her stomach dropped. She didn't know the kid well, but she'd seen him at community events, always polite, always kind. The text read, "Leave it alone, or he pays." Diane's eyes shot to Vince, who was still staring at her, a faint smirk on his lips. Did he send this? Was he threatening a teenager to keep her quiet? Her hands shook with rage, but she couldn't move, couldn't speak. The dive log felt heavy in her hands, Marcus's words screaming from the pages. She was so close to answers, but now Jamal was in danger, and the truth about her son felt further away than ever. Vince took a step toward her, his voice low. "You're asking the wrong questions, lady." Diane's heart pounded, but she held his gaze, refusing to back down. She didn't know how, but she'd save Jamal and find out what happened to Marcus, even if it meant facing Vince head-on. Jamal's lungs burned as he sprinted through the streets, the sound of footsteps fading but not gone. He clutched the map and photo, his mind a blur of fear and determination. He had to get to Diane, had to tell her what he'd found. The drop point on the map wasn't far from Coral Bay, a spot deep in the reefs where no one dived anymore. Whatever happened to Marcus and his friends, it started there, and Vince was at the center of it. As Jamal rounded a corner, he saw the docks in the distance, the faint glow of the rusty anchor's sign. He didn't know Diane was there, standing just yards from the man they were both chasing. He didn't know how close they were to unraveling the truth, or how close they were to losing everything. The night was thick with secrets, and the ocean was watching, waiting to see who would break first. Jamal's sneakers skidded on the damp pavement as he neared the docks, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The map and photo in his pocket felt like they were burning, each step pulling him closer to answers he wasn't sure he was ready for. The rusty anchor's neon sign glowed ahead, a beacon in the foggy night, but the weight of Vince's threat lingered like a shadow. He'd barely escaped the alley, the sound of that car's engine still echoing in his ears. Who was Vince, and how did he know Jamal had been at Earl's? The drop point on the map was out there in Coral Bay, a place no diver touched anymore, whispered about like it was cursed. Jamal's mind raced. Marcus and his friends had vanished near that spot, and now he was holding a clue that could crack the mystery wide open. But as he approached the bar, he saw two figures in the parking lot, their voices sharp in the still air. One was a woman, clutching a notebook, her stance defiant. The other was Vince, his anchor tattoo catching the streetlight. Jamal froze. The woman was Diane, Marcus's mom. His heart pounded. He wanted to run to her, show her the map, but something stopped him, a glint of metal in Vince's hand, half hidden by his jacket. Was that a knife? Jamal ducked behind a dumpster, his pulse thundering. This was no game anymore. Diane's eyes were locked on Vince, her fear buried under a decade of grief and fury. The text with Jamal's photo had shaken her, but standing here, face to face with the man who might know what happened to her son, she refused to back down. "I know about the boat," she said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. She held up Marcus's dive log, open to the page about the sketchy boat. "You were there that day, weren't you? What did you do to my son?" Vince's smirk faded, his eyes narrowing. "You're out of your depth, lady," he growled, stepping closer. The metal in his hand glinted again, and Diane's breath hitched. She didn't care. She'd lost everything when Marcus disappeared, and she wasn't leaving without answers. But before she could press further, a new voice cut through the tension, a woman's voice, sharp and commanding. "Vince, enough." Diane turned, stunned, as a figure stepped from the shadows. It was the pregnant woman from Jamal's bus, no longer pregnant, her face hard and unreadable. Diane's mind reeled. Who was she? And why was she here, with Vince, at the heart of this mystery? Jamal's jaw dropped as he peered from his hiding spot. The woman from the bus, the one who'd given him the note, was standing there, her eyes flicking between Diane and Vince like she was in charge. His hand tightened around the map, the words drop point searing into his brain. The note had led him here, but now he wasn't sure if it was a clue or a trap. Had she set him up? His mind flashed to the moment on the bus, her tired smile, the way she'd pressed the note into his hand. "Find the man with the anchor tattoo," she'd written. But why? Was she trying to help, or was she part of whatever happened at Coral Bay? Jamal's stomach twisted as he realized the truth was slipping further away. He wanted to shout, to warn Diane, but the glint of Vince's knife kept him rooted. Then he saw it, a second car pulling into the lot, slow and quiet, its headlights off. Someone else was here, watching. The stakes had just skyrocketed, and Jamal was caught in the middle, clutching a map that might lead to answers or to his own end. Diane's head spun as she faced the woman, her grip on the dive log tightening. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking with anger and confusion. The woman's eyes softened for a moment, almost regretful, before hardening again. "You're asking questions that could get you hurt," she said, glancing at Vince. "And you're not the only one." Diane's mind raced to the text, to Jamal's photo. Was this woman behind it? Did she know where Jamal was now? Before Diane could speak, the woman stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's more to Coral Bay than you think. Marcus and his friends, they saw something they shouldn't have." Diane's heart stopped. Saw something? Like what? A deal gone wrong? A secret hidden in the reefs? She wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but the woman's next words hit like a punch. "If you keep pushing, you'll lose more than your son." The threat hung in the air, heavy as the fog rolling in from the sea. Diane glanced at Vince, who was watching the woman like a dog waiting for a command. This wasn't just about him anymore, there was someone else pulling the strings. Jamal's breath caught as he overheard the woman's words. Marcus saw something. His fingers brushed the photo in his pocket, the one with Vince's boat at the edge of the frame. The drop point on the map, was that where it happened? His mind raced with possibilities: drugs, smuggling, something worse. He didn't know, but he knew he had to get the map to Diane. She was out there, facing Vince and this mystery woman, with no idea how close she was to danger. The second car was still idling in the lot, its driver hidden behind tinted windows. Jamal's gut screamed that it was connected, maybe Earl, maybe someone worse. He needed to move, but every choice felt like a gamble. If he ran to Diane, he'd expose himself. If he stayed hidden, He might lose his chance to help her. His eyes darted to the bar's entrance, where a shadow moved. Someone else was coming. Friend or foe, he couldn't tell, but the air was thick with secrets, and time was running out. Diane took a step back, her mind a whirlwind. The woman's words echoed Marcus's dive log. Trey thought it was sketchy. Her son and his friends had stumbled onto something big enough to cost them their lives. And now Jamal was tangled in it, his photo a warning that this wasn't over. She glared at the woman, then at Vince, who was still clutching that glint of metal. "I'm not stopping," Diane said, her voice low and fierce. "Not until I know what happened to my son." The woman's face didn't change, but her eyes flicked to the idling car in the lot, a silent signal. Diane followed her gaze, her heart pounding. Who was in that car? And what did they know about Coral Bay? Before anyone could move, a shout broke the silence. "Jamal!" Sprinting from behind the dumpster, the map held high. "Diane!" he yelled, his voice cracking with urgency. Vince spun, his hand tightening on the knife, and the woman's eyes widened. The car's engine roared to life, tires screeching as it peeled out of the lot. Diane and Jamal locked eyes, the map fluttering in his hand, and in that moment, they both knew. The truth was closer than ever, but so was the danger, and it was coming for them both. The air around the rusty anchor was electric, the fog curling like a living thing as Jamal sprinted toward Diane, the map clutched in his shaking hand. Diane's eyes widened, her heart lurching at the sight of the teenager she barely knew, now running straight into the lion's den. Vince's knife gleamed under the streetlight, his face twisting with rage as he lunged toward Jamal. "Kid, you're done," he snarled, but Diane was faster. She threw herself between them, Marcus's dive log slipping from her hands and hitting the ground. "Leave him alone," she shouted, her voice raw with 10 years of grief and fury. The mystery woman from the bus stepped forward, her hand raised, but not to stop Vince, to stop the chaos. "Enough," she barked, her voice cutting through the night. Vince froze, his knife hovering, and Jamal skidded to a halt, panting, his eyes locked on Diane. The map fluttered to the ground, landing beside the dive log, the drop point circle glaring up at them like an accusation. In that moment, the truth about Coral Bay began to unravel, but it came at a price neither Diane nor Jamal could have imagined. The woman's name was Sarah, and she wasn't just a bystander. She'd been on that second boat 10 years ago, a reluctant accomplice in a smuggling ring Vince ran out of Coral Bay. Her voice shook as she spoke, her eyes darting between Diane, Jamal, and the darkness where the mystery car had vanished. "Marcus and his friends, they saw us," she admitted, her words heavy with guilt. "We were moving cargo, illegal stuff, through the reefs. They weren't supposed to be there." Diane's knees buckled, but she caught herself, her hands clenched into fists. "You killed them," she whispered, her voice breaking. Sarah shook her head, tears welling. "No. It was an accident. Their boat got too close, and Vince," he panicked. He cut their anchor line, thinking they'd just drift off. But the current was too strong. It pulled them under. Diane's world tilted, the image of Marcus fighting the waves searing into her mind. Jamal, still clutching the photo from Earl's shed, stepped forward, his voice trembling but firm. "Why'd you give me that note? Why drag me into this?" Sarah looked at him, her face crumpling. "I saw you on the bus, so kind, so like my brother who was on that boat with Marcus. I couldn't live with the secret anymore." Vince's face darkened, his knife still raised. "You're ruining everything, Sarah," he growled, taking a step toward her. But before he could move, a new sound cut through the fog. Sirens, sharp and close, blue and red lights flashing as police cars screeched into the lot. Diane's sister had called them, worried when Diane didn't check in. Vince froze, his knife clattering to the ground as officers swarmed, cuffing him in seconds. Sarah didn't resist, her shoulders slumping as she whispered, "I'm sorry." Diane sank to her knees, picking up the dive log and the map, tears streaming down her face. The truth was out. Marcus and his friends hadn't just vanished, they'd been caught in a deadly mistake, swept away by a current Vince's actions had set in motion. Jamal stood beside her, his own eyes wet, the photo of Vince's boat trembling in his hand. He'd helped uncover the truth, his simple act of kindness on a bus rippling into a confrontation that broke a decade-long mystery. But as the police led Vince and Sarah away, Diane felt no peace, only the hollow ache of knowing her son was gone forever. Then came the twist. As the officers cleared the scene, one approached Diane, holding a sealed envelope. "Found this in Vince's truck," he said, handing it to her. Diane's hands shook as she opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper, a list of names, dates, and coordinates, all tied to Coral Bay. At the bottom, in Marcus's handwriting, was a note: "If you find this, Ma, don't stop. There's more." Diane's breath caught, her heart racing as she looked at Jamal. The smuggling ring wasn't just Vince and Sarah, someone else was out there, someone who'd been watching from that mystery car, someone who'd kept this secret buried for 10 years. The police had Vince, Sarah was confessing, but the real mastermind, the one Marcus had tried to warn her about, was still free. Jamal's eyes met hers, the map still in his hand, its drop point now a promise of more secrets hidden in the reefs. The truth about Coral Bay wasn't over, it was just beginning, and Diane and Jamal were the only ones who could finish what Marcus started. The police lights faded into the foggy night as Diane clutched the envelope, Marcus's handwriting searing into her soul. "If you find this, Ma, don't stop. There's more." Her hands shook, the weight of those words heavier than the dive log or the map Jamal still held. The parking lot of the Rusty Anchor was quiet now, Vince and Sarah gone, their confessions echoing in Diane's mind. Marcus and his friends hadn't just drowned in a freak accident, they'd been caught in a smuggling ring's web, their boat dragged under by a current Vince triggered in a panic. But that list of names and coordinates, scrawled in her son's hand, pointed to something bigger, someone still out there. Jamal stood beside her, his young face etched with determination, the photo of Vince's boat crumpled in his fist. He'd stumbled into this mystery with a note from a stranger, and now he was tied to Diane, to Marcus, to Coral Bay. The ocean's secrets weren't fully uncovered, and as the fog thickened, Diane knew they had one last dive to make. Jamal broke the silence, his voice soft but steady. "That drop point on the map, it's gotta be where Marcus left this." He held up the map, the red circle glaring under the streetlight. Diane nodded, her throat tight. The coordinates matched a spot deep in the reefs, a place divers avoided after the tragedy. She'd spent 10 years haunted by Coral Bay, but now it was calling her back. "We need to go there," she said, her eyes meeting Jamal's. He hesitated, the memory of Vince's knife flashing in his mind, but he thought of the pregnant woman, Sarah, whose note had pulled him into this. Her guilt had given him a purpose, and he wasn't backing out now. "I'm in," he said, his voice cracking with resolve. Diane managed a small smile, seeing a spark of Marcus in him. They didn't know what they'd find, but Marcus's note was a promise, a final gift from her son, urging her to finish what he couldn't. The next morning, Diane and Jamal met Lena at the docks, the young diver's face pale but determined. She'd overheard enough at the Rusty Anchor to know the truth was bigger than Vince, and she owed it to Marcus, her old friend, to help. They rented a small boat, its engine humming as they headed for the drop point. The sea was calm, but Diane's heart raced, memories of Marcus's last dive flooding back. Jamal sat beside her, clutching the map, his eyes scanning the horizon. Lena steered, her hands steady despite the tension. "This spot's deep," she warned. "Whatever's down there, it's been hidden for a reason." As they reached the coordinates, the water turned a darker blue, the reef below a maze of shadows. Diane suited up, her old diving gear feeling like a second skin. Jamal wasn't trained, so he stayed on the boat, but his eyes were fierce. "Find it," he said, handing her a waterproof flashlight. Diane nodded, then dove into the abyss, Lena at her side. The underwater world was silent, the reef a tangle of coral and secrets. Diane's beam cut through the murk, her heart pounding as she followed the coordinates. Then she saw it, a glint of metal, half buried in the sand. A small, sealed box, rusted but intact, wedged between rocks. Her fingers trembled as she pried it open, revealing a waterproof journal. Marcus's journal. Her breath caught, bubbles rising as she flipped it open. Pages of notes detailed the smuggling ring dates, shipments, and a name that made her blood run cold: Carl, the boat mechanic who'd dodged her questions. He wasn't just a witness, he was the mastermind, orchestrating the operation from the shadows. Marcus had seen his boat, overheard his plans, and hidden this journal before the current took him. Diane clutched it, tears mixing with the sea. Her son had been a hero, trying to expose the truth, and it had cost him his life. Back on the boat, Diane showed the journal to Jamal and Lena, her voice shaking as she read Carl's name. Jamal's eyes widened. "I saw him at the docks, the day I went to Earl's. He was watching me." Lena cursed under her breath. "Carl's been off the grid for years. Everyone thought he was just a washed-up mechanic." Diane's jaw tightened. Carl had been the one in the mystery car, the one sending threats to keep her quiet. They took the journal to the police, who tracked Carl to a rundown cabin on the edge of town. He didn't resist when they arrested him, his face hollow as he admitted to running the smuggling ring. Vince had been his muscle, Sarah his reluctant lookout, but Carl was the brain, covering his tracks for a decade. Marcus and his friends had been collateral damage, their boat caught in a desperate bid to protect the operation. The police recovered evidence from Carl's cabin, ledgers, photos, proof that tied him to Coral Bay. Justice was coming, but for Diane, it was bittersweet. Her son was gone, his laughter silenced, but his courage had brought the truth to light. Jamal sat with Diane at her kitchen table days later, the same table where she'd once shared hot chocolate with Marcus. The journal lay between them, a testament to her son's bravery. Jamal's note from Sarah was there too, its words faded but powerful. "You helped me find him," Diane said, her voice soft. "You didn't have to, but you did." Jamal shrugged, his cheeks warm. "I just gave up a seat. Didn't know it'd lead to this." Diane smiled, the first real one in years. Jamal's kindness had set everything in motion, a ripple that broke open a decade-old mystery. But as they talked, a final twist emerged. The police called, saying they'd found one last piece of evidence in Carl's cabin, a video, recorded by Marcus's friend Trey. It showed the group diving, laughing, unaware of the danger, but in the background was a second figure, not Carl or Vince. A woman, her face blurred but familiar. Diane's heart stopped. It was Ms. Carter, Jamal's history teacher, who'd pointed him to Earl. She'd been part of the ring, hiding in plain sight, steering Jamal to keep him close. Diane and Jamal sat in stunned silence. Ms. Carter had vanished, the police searching but finding no trace. She was the final shadow, the one Marcus had tried to warn them about. Diane looked at Jamal, her eyes fierce. "We got most of them," she said. "That's because of you and Marcus." Jamal nodded, the weight of it settling in. The ocean had given up its secrets, but one remained, swimming just out of reach. As Diane hugged him, she felt Marcus's presence, his courage living on. The takeaway was clear: kindness, like Jamal's, could spark truth, and love, like Diane's, could move mountains. Coral Bay was quiet now, but its waves whispered a reminder: some secrets sink, but the brave keep diving.